President Zelensky visits flood-hit Kherson as Ukraine and Russia continue to blame each other for breaching the major dam. Ukraine's President Zelensky has criticised the lack of help from international aid agencies to deal with the flooding in the southern Kherson region after the destruction of a dam on Tuesday. It's thought an area the size of Merseyside is underwater. Mr. Zelensky visited the area today to see the scale of the flooding. Ukraine and Russia have accused each other of shelling the area while rescuers try to save people who are still trapped. Our Ukraine correspondent James Waterhouse sent this report.
A visit with deliberate timing. President Zelensky assessing another Ukrainian trauma, an unfolding disaster in the middle of a war. He praised medical staff and promised them Kherson would be rebuilt. But the Russians can do deliberate too. A couple of hours later, the same area was shelled, with a near miss for volunteers doing an already impossible job. It's hard to picture an estimated 4 cubic miles of water until you're in it. Viktor and Vitaly haven't stopped for 2 days, searching for people trapped. Why don't you want to leave? So they've said, we don't want to leave. There are older people who can't get away. Give us your power banks so they can charge devices. While the water levels have stabilised, they're still dauntingly high. So we're just now passing through 2 apartment blocks. And it feels like a strange theme park ride because of what we're having to weave through. And yet, Viktor is asking people whether they want to be evacuated. No one yet has taken him up on that offer. And why do you think people don't want to leave their home?
Many people stupid, you know. He think it's okay, everything after okay, maybe 1 day, 2 days, but not okay. Every time water, more.
When this finally recedes, you wonder what will be left. A war, an invasion by Russia, which takes everything. James Waterhouse, BBC News, Kherson.
Well, Ukrainian officials are now warning of the long-term consequences of the dam's destruction on agriculture and infrastructure. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale is here to assess the scale of the damage. James.
Sophie, the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam is more than just a short-term humanitarian crisis. The United Nations is warning of grave and far-reaching consequences for thousands of people who live in this whole region, not just those who've lost their homes. Now, these infrared satellite images show the scale of the flooding downstream before and then after the dam burst. And you can see just how much land has been inundated on both sides, flooding towns, washing away crops. Now, this was the town of Oleshki on the Russian-occupied East Bank. And, well, this is what it looks like now. But there's also a risk of pollution from oil and chemicals caught up in the flood. And there's danger from landmines washed away from known locations. And there are wider consequences too, further upstream. Now, of course, there's carnage for fish and other wildlife in the short term. But there'll also be a shortage of drinking water, especially in towns like Zaporizhia, and potentially, most importantly, long-term devastation for farming. Both sides of the front line relied on this reservoir for irrigation, and Ukraine's agriculture ministry says that without the water, more than 1 million acres of land, all this fertile stuff here, could become like a desert. And there are military consequences too. Russia feared that Ukraine might counterattack across the river here, but there's no road across the dam anymore, and the floods make any kind of amphibious assault harder. So Russia's western flank is now much more secure. But perhaps most importantly, this humanitarian disaster is a massive distraction for Ukraine's commanders as they begin to test Russia's defences all the way along the front line ahead of any counteroffensive.